And I am trying something a little bit different this week for my live content UX audit. I've been using Ecamm Live, and it connects to Restream, which then gets it to all the different platforms. And today I'm trying to go live directly from Restream instead, to see if that works and gives me less technical problems. And so I didn't schedule this one because I didn't want people to be waiting for it if it wasn't working. I'm just looking around and I think it's working right now, so that's great. But anyway, so this is my weekly live content UX audit series. If you would like to submit your content to be audited, like we're going to do today, you can use this link at the bottom of the screen here, this blogsmith.tips/content UX. I'm always taking volunteers, and it just asks a couple of really simple questions. And I meant to bring it up today so I could show you that, but I think next week I will have it up and show you. But basically, it just asks for your name, a URL, and if there's anything in particular that you want me to focus on. So you could be the next featured brand for next week and beyond if you submit your content. Excuse me. So I am going to get into the audit itself. And today we're going to be auditing Softr, a blog on their website. Really quick before we get into it, just wanted to remind you of the resource that is the Blogsmith style guide, and use another fancy feature here on Restream to show you the link that you can grab to check it out for yourself, this blogsmith.tips/style-guide. So this is a great resource, something that you can use as like a foundational style guide if you don't have one for your brand, or if it's really simple and you're looking to add a little bit more guidance and standards that your writers and editors can use, across different departments. It also comes as a handy PDF that you can download. That is just as pretty as this page, but easier to bring with you wherever you need it. So with that being said, let's jump back into kind of our focus and topic for today, which is this Softr blog that I more or less picked at random. I kind of looked at a couple of different assets that were recently published. And this one kind of spoke to me for a few reasons. First of all, just say that like no code is a passion of mine. I have not personally messed around with Softr. I know that it is a tool that like Superpath uses, and so I've interacted with it in terms of using some of the features within that community, which is an awesome community. If you're a fellow content marketer, you should join. They have free and paid levels. Both are great. But really, like my no code journey, I think started initially when I was trying to figure out like the perfect project management tool for me, for my team. I could never find something that was just like absolutely perfect and, ticked all the boxes, even the things that had custom fields. It just wasn't enough customization for me and my ideal workflow. And so I've used a number of no code tools and automations and things like that to build my ideal workflow and process, which the stack, if you're curious about it, now includes Airtable, Process Street. We use other tools that I wouldn't say are necessarily no code, like, Slack and Notion and things like that. But anyway, so I haven't used Softr personally, but I've used a competitor of theirs, which is called Glide. And it operates very similarly, where essentially the tool helps you to create like a useful interface that people can interact with, from something like a Google Sheets or Airtable like database of, where that data is coming from. So let's go ahead and get into the article itself now that you kind of understand like where I'm coming at it from. And as a user of not only some of these no code tools, but this particular article is focusing on Zapier, I think in this past year even, released their own sort of like interfaces layer that you can layer on top of the automations that you build in Zapier, and like data tables and things like that. And so Softr is, explaining why they're a good alternative to that. And in this sense, they're also explaining how they integrate with Zapier, as you'll see as we go through here. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And so far, I'm very pleased with Restream Studio replacing my Ecamm Live setup. So fingers crossed that it continues to just work and that everybody can see this live who wants to. Um, as far as the hero image area, I'm just not super taken with this. I think if we go back to like the blog itself, that each post, has like a featured image before you click through. And there's nothing super distinctive, I would say, about these featured images. It's kind of standard. I don't know that it has to be distinctive. I'm just kind of calling out what I'm seeing here. They do fit like a consistent mold, or they kind of fit together. So I think that's the most important thing, is that they have some level of consistency with each other. But when you go back to the blog itself, you don't see imagery at the top. And Softr's branding on these blog posts in general, like how their brand comes through, I guess it's kind of maybe even like opposite to what we did last week, which was a Klaviyo blog post audit. And there were so many like elements of distinction, and I think that that's actually like outside of the norm of what I usually audit. But with Softr, it's just like, it's very like light colors, and maybe that is kind of part of the brand, but there's just not a whole lot of visual distinction within the content itself. And you'll kind of see that as we go through, that I think it's a real missed opportunity to not do that in the hero image area. And certainly, like, doing something like that would affect the template, right? You'd have to make changes, and then you'd have to make changes to like the other blog posts that were already published. So it's not an easy fix, right? But it's just something that I'm going to call out. I think beyond that, it has the essential information. We have the heading, we have the writer's name, we know when it was published, and we have a sense for how long it would take to read the article. So we kind of have a sense of depth here. One thing that I've been saying on these audits, which I think is kind of a change from how things used to be to like how I see them moving to the future, is I would love to see a push in content to put author bios, not just their name, but like a bio that explains why, they're a good person to write this topic, kind of their relevant experience. I would love to see that more in the hero image area, because I think that's what readers are looking for these days, especially in this like age of like, is the content written by a human? Is it written by a robot? If it is written by a human, I want to know like who that human is. And I think that adds like a layer of credibility that's going to be so important moving forward. All right, so not a whole lot to say about the intro. It's kind of setting the stage that, we're going to talk about this topic from the perspective of comparing to Zapier's interface product, as well as, the alternatives that exist out there, why you would use these different products. So yeah, there wasn't anything that super stood out to me in the intro itself. We have a table of contents, and I love that. I really think that that's important. Again, like moving forward with content, if it's not something that you've done yet, really go out and consider it. What I really like, and this is like a do as I say, not as I do sort of thing, is when the table of contents kind of follows you in a sidebar. I think that's really useful. That's not what we have at the Blogsmith right now. But it's something that I would like to implement. And when I see it on somebody else's blog, that's something that I really respond to. And I think that it just makes the user experience a lot better. People can kind of jump around. Nobody's going to read this, all the way through like in order. So you might as well cater to what you know about readers and their behavior. So let's keep going. One thing that I have noticed that is a little bit jarring is the spacing between sections, and in particular between the intro and the table of contents and the bottom of the table of contents to the next section. It is inconsistent. It gets kind of consistent as we move forward. You can see kind of like the spacing between sections is more or less about the same. Like if I was to measure it, with a pixel ruler, although this one looks more. And it seems like maybe it is these numbered lists, these ordered lists that have some extra padding or something under them. So that might be why it's driving that. So that's one thing. And I comment on this often when it comes to auditing content. It's just like when there is an inconsistency with spacing, whether that's between sections or, something else, it's something that is hard to pick up consciously, unless you're like a web developer person or someone like me who like audits things from this perspective. But it is something that I think comes across badly to the end user, maybe even perhaps because they can't put words on it, because it's kind of subconscious. So that's just my, like, I say this every time I do these, but be very careful about the consistency in your spacing in between sections. So another thing that I'll talk about from like a purely stylistic like formatting point of view, and then I'll kind of jump around and back just as a normal reader would, right? Um, if we look at these ordered lists, I was trying to figure out when I was looking if there was something about them that was inconsistent, because there was something inconsistent to my eye. And maybe I was looking at like the list that had these links or something. I was trying to figure out if the links were making, or if the link text was maybe like a different font size, but it's actually the numbered list itself. So if we go to inspect and we look at the link styling here, let me see if I can find it. Okay, so they have it in, no, sorry, that's the padding. If we look for, let's just see if I can replicate it for you. They have the size, the font size for these bullet lists, and now I can't see them anymore. So let me just center my screen. They're actually measured in M's instead of pixels. Let's see if it'll let me show you, or rems. I'm familiar with M's, I think. But anyway, so like, look what happens if I change this to 18 pixels, which is the size of the text, and I'll prove it to you if you want. If I can. Sometimes it's hard to do this live. You might just have to take my word for it. Okay, here it is right here. So when I use Inspector to change the size of that, now it looks a lot better, right? It's the same size as the text that follows it. But there's just something a little bit funky about it before doing that. So I'm not going to try to change it back live because it's just going to take more time than it's worth. But look how much nicer that looks. And I think it changed all of them probably when I made that, so you won't be able to see it. But, you know, if you want to go back and look after this, you certainly can and see what they were before. So anyway, that was another like inconsistency thing that stood out to me that was just catching my eye in a weird way. And it took going into Inspector to figure out why. The next thing I wanted to talk about is these what is kind of like keyword sections. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately because I think there is a place for these. I think a lot of content marketers are quick to say like, oh, you know, that's formulaic, or that's not necessary, or, you know, it's not really adding anything. So my thought on this, and I might have covered this in a previous audit, is I think it's like answering the what is, you know, term question in the context of the article you're writing about. So for this, it's like, what is workflow automation in terms of talking about Zapier interfaces and these other alternatives that you might be considering? And so, I feel like that particular question is kind of answered here, but I think that if there is like a slight shift either to the heading itself, or if you want to preserve that because maybe you're going after, you know, some sort of like featured snippet, or, you know, like it's important to preserve the wording as is, answering it in the way that I'm saying within the text itself, I think is the play. If you have to have this section, make sure that it's very much within the context of the particular topic you're writing about, and not just a definition, is what I'm trying to get at here. Okay, so then we get into like, okay, why would you consider these different alternatives? And I will point out another inconsistency, which is you'll notice like this paragraph has like a blank line of space between it, whereas this paragraph and the one that follows it, and sorry for the pop-up thing, do not. So that's something else just to be careful of is, you know, within sections, it's like everything should correspond, you know, within the article itself, even if it's a different section, if that makes sense. So, so looking at the text itself, the copy, the content here, I thought this was really cool that they used different, these are actually links to G2, popular review platform, especially for B2B software solutions. And so we can see like, this is like what actual people have said about, they're talking about Zapier interfaces here. And all that's really useful and great. I think it's a great way to use like content that already exists, right? Like, because the writer and the brand don't represent Zapier, this is a really effective way to get some useful feedback that you can then use to kind of position for like what you really want people to do here, which is ultimately to consider Softr. So anyway, the one thing that I will say about using something like reviews or using, I'm going to say subject matter insights, subject matter expert insights in general, is be careful not to just like drop the quotes and leave it there. I mean, we do have these headings that kind of merchandise them a little bit. So that's useful. But what I would have liked to see here is a little bit more storytelling, you know? So it's not just like organizing them and putting a heading on, but kind of like weaving some thoughts around these different things and like leading them down the path again to like why Softr, instead of just letting these reviews like speak to that, like adding in the writer's own voice and things like that. And a brand that you can look to that I think does a really excellent job of this is Databox with their subject matter expert insight driven pieces. You know, it's very much based on the subject matter quotes themselves, but they do a really nice job of weaving them into like a story and you know, just like a narrative that goes beyond like leaving the quotes and even organizing them into different sections. So let's keep moving here. So then we get into, okay, we've talked about, you know, why you might want to consider an alternative to Zapier. And now we're talking about how you would maybe go about choosing that particular alternative. I don't think I had any particular comments here. You know, fair enough. I think that is a necessary section to have. Everything looks pretty consistent. One thing that I sometimes see that I don't see here, which is good, is sometimes formatting extends where it shouldn't. And so, for example, like what if, say, for example, you know, this was bolded and the period wasn't, but then this one was and this one wasn't. It just creates a bad user experience, but they're all consistent here. So it's a good user experience to me. One thing that we do talk about in the Blogsmith style guide is not extending formatting to punctuation, but that is a very personal preference. As long as it's consistent, that's really what I care about. All right, so then we get into kind of like the list, okay? And in a sense, it's kind of an article within an article, which is something to be careful about. I think that's something that we have in the Blogsmith style guide too, in terms of like what I might not do is say 7 best. Or maybe you could keep best, but I would keep out the number because of that whole like listicle within the listicle thing. We have so many other sections between the reviews we just went through, sort of like the definition. And this is really like the last part of it, but we've already kind of gone through like a bunch of meat and potatoes before we get to the list of the actual alternatives. So saying something like, you know, Zapier interfaces alternatives to choose from or best, I would just take out the 7. Even if it is a numbered list, that's fine. But I wouldn't use that in a subheading. And hopefully that makes sense. And by the way, I think there is like a chat component here. Obviously, I'm like figuring everything out here. But if you have any questions while I go through, I'll periodically look at that chat. And if anything doesn't make sense, please let me know. So anyway, we get into the list. The other thing that I'm kind of curious about is I think it's actually okay to number them then within the list, just not within the way that we describe the list, if that makes sense. But what I don't totally understand is adding the word alternative. And I wonder if that is an SEO play. I'm just not totally sure. But usually what I would expect to see is number 1, Softr, number 2, Airtable, number 3, etc. Instead of kind of like adding extra, I don't know, just like wording, description. I don't know that that's necessary, but I am curious if there's some sort of like SEO play to that. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention was there's a CTA in the upper kind of like right area that it didn't pop up because probably whatever their pop-up settings are. I might have like looked at it too long. And then now that I'm showing you this here today, it's like going away. So anyway, they had like a pop-up and then they have their cookie consent notice that kind of goes opposite to that. And the pop-up was a call to action to use Softr, much as like we've seen, if you've watched any of my other content UX audits, it's a pretty common sort of like, what am I trying to say, heuristic to have some sort of call to action for the brand, get started, something about like signing up for a free account, something like that, where it's like a micro conversion of sorts. And so the idea of the CTA, I think, is great. Paired with the cookie pop-up, it's a little bit obtrusive, I think. And so I think there's a case to be made here for that sidebar that has a table of contents and that like cookie, or not, sorry, cookie, the like micro conversion call to action, and or maybe merchandising it within the content itself, having that call to action. And it could be both. Got to appreciate the made with Softr in the bottom left corner here as well. And that's something that I've noticed in terms of interacting with other Softr created interfaces, like the ones I was talking about with SuperPath. So that's just a nice distinction. I don't know that all these alternatives that they're talking about necessarily do that by default, kind of like add their branding, but it's very smart. So all right, so of course Softr is going to be first. That makes sense. The one thing that I will say about this, having looked at the other alternatives here, is that this then the way that it's approached in this article is that for each section with Softr, everything's like pretty long. Okay, so let me give you an example. So we've seen like key features, there's 9. Softr versus Zapier interfaces, there's 7. Pricing, all the details. But then you see like, we go into these next ones and everything, this one's a little bit more meaty. None of them are quite as fleshed out as the Softr one, which, okay, on one hand, that makes sense, right? Because Softr is the one that we're trying to get people to go towards. We're trying to give the most information about it. But there is an imbalance. And so that's what I'm calling out. Whenever I see an inconsistency, like that's the first thing that I want to try to figure out why it feels weird to me or whatever. So anyway, I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just pointing it out as an inconsistency and just like an imbalance maybe. And again, it's like, it's definitely fine to focus on, the one that it's like Softr is the one who commissioned this article. They deserve to talk about their brand. I think that sometimes brands get really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like, they're almost like afraid to pull themselves into it, even though they're the ones who are creating the article, for their ideal audience. Like, I think you should feel emboldened, to have those CTAs and to position your brand favorably. But again, I'm starting to get into a rant here. It's just that it feels inconsistent with the others to a fault almost. And then because there's so much detail here, it's also starting to feel like an article within an article, just like what I was talking about in terms of like a listicle within a listicle. So do with that what you will, but let's keep moving on. I don't know that I had a whole lot to say about, these like individual features themselves. I think that, it's great that we can see these different interfaces. We kind of get a sense for them. And I guess one thing that I did notice is I think that each of these gets to a point where they say, this would be best for this type of use case. Or one thing that it says in the conclusion, which is a good point, is, it kind of depends on like where you store your data in the first place, because these different interfaces will offer different opportunities. But if, everything that you do is in Google Sheets and one of these interface alternatives, doesn't support that, then it's like, that's kind of out for you then, right? Unless you're really willing to switch everything over for this new tool that you've never used before. But what I was going to say is it would be nice to have within these like listicle items. I'm just going to go back up. So sorry for the Blair Witch scrolling. It would be nice to have a heading that that is, best for, and then I can kind of skim, right? Because again, if there's a situation where all my stuff's in Google Sheets and, Airtable doesn't use Google Sheets, which is not necessarily the case, but let's just say that is, then I would like to know that right away so that I don't really like waste my time reading the rest of this. So if there's any sort of like major use cases or major limitations within a listicle, if you're really trying to help your reader, I think that is an important heading to have. Let's see what else I was going to say. See if there's any like really important. Let's go down and then I might go back up again and see if there's anything that stands out to me from these. So they have 7 alternatives, which, I think that's a good amount. They're all a little bit different too. Like this one, it's talking about how it was originally a backend as a service and then it kind of like evolved. So, that's cool. It's like they have things from like all different sides of the software world, the things that are the obvious alternatives and the things that have maybe grown to be that you wouldn't have thought of. This is kind of an awkward ending. Grab Zapier interfaces alternative that fits your need. Maybe that's a keyword thing, but again, I think there is a way to use awkward keywords in a less awkward way, and something like maybe adding like the word that in between interfaces and alternative. From my perspective, that's not going to like meaningfully change your ability to rank, in terms of trying to use keywords optimally throughout the article. I think that Google has grown and matured enough that something like that isn't going to like change the meaning of you trying to use that keyword. So yeah, there were a couple awkward things throughout that might have been keyword driven. And again, I'm here to say, like, don't feel like you're stuck using like the most awkward version of a keyword. You can sometimes add, like different stop words and things like that. It kind of ends and there's not a really big push for Softr. We have this line with a call to action and then Softr's been talked about throughout, but it kind of feels like it ends and I'm like maybe expecting more of a push for it. And again, I'm saying like you have my permission as a reader. If you commission this article and you really tried to make it a great resource that does share, a lot of different tools and things like that, like you're allowed to have your CTA at the end. And so I would like to have seen even another line of text about it or something. I think is fair, just so that it doesn't kind of like fall away into the wayside. So let me just see if there was anything else that that was calling out to me. One thing, and maybe I need to find like a specific section. When it comes to using things like bolding for emphasis, it's a very fine line, I think. And something like this, it draws my eye, but it draws my eye into so many different places, right? And so what I'm here to say is like use bolding for emphasis, but use it sparingly. Use text decorations sparingly and for emphasis, and that will create the best reader experience. It's also a little bit inconsistent here because like this is bold, the first text that comes after the number, but this isn't, and this isn't, but this is, and this is, and this is, but this isn't. So again, it's like it's all about creating consistency, I think. I think there's like one more thing that I wanted to say, which is at the beginning here, when we were talking about the different reviews and the headings that kind of like merchandises and organizes them, it's kind of strange to me that we're having like a numbered list styling, but then it's incongruent with, the sort of like tabbed in numbering here. The other thing is I would expect these to be headings, but they're actually not. They're like span style to get the bolding for the paragraph text. So anyway, I mean, these are all things, again, it's like do as I say, not as I do, because on the Blogsmith site, I could probably give you examples of how we've like done all these things that I've, called out and drawn attention to. But I think it's a good exercise for all of us to just be critical, right? To look at our existing user experience and the way that we've address style on that page, on other pages. It's such an important like underlying foundational aspect of just the content experience in general, besides the copy itself. So I hope I've given you some useful things to think about today. This was a really fun one for me. And again, I think there's something that like we can all take away from it, including myself, and a reminder to just, yeah, go back in and periodically audit your content experience and your style. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so thrilled that this actually happened live and it worked out live as intended. The last probably four or so have been like weird technical glitches where it starts live and then it doesn't really work. And that's just like not fun for anyone. So I think I'm going to do this moving forward. But anyway, the last thing that I'll say again is a reminder, if you would like me to audit your content, for the next one of these, you can use this link, blogsmith.tips/content-UX. And I will hope to see you next time. So thanks.